Drone strikes in Yemen are killing dozens of suspected terrorists, and representatives from several Western states are meeting to discuss how to get land out of the control of the federal government. But I want to talk to you not only about these things, but how you and I might impact the debate, how to become a voice, how to become a force. This is the voice of resistance.
Standing for truth in the four corners of America. Fighting for justice on the frontiers of the culture wars. And turning resistance into an art form. Randall Terry.
Happy Easter week to you. As we film this, there are pounding drone strikes going on in Yemen that have taken dozens of suspected terrorist lives. There are representatives from a bunch of Western states that are meeting in the wake of the Clive and Bundy confrontation, talking about how those states can get back control of their state lands from the federal government. There's a lot in the news, but I'm going to swing back to it at the end of the program, but I wanted to use this moment to first thank everyone and to update you on our situation and maybe speak heart to heart, a dad to other dads or to moms, grandmas and grandpas, and hopefully bless you and even inspire you. For those of you who don't know, we have relocated to Memphis, Tennessee. We're in our temporary studio right now because one of our sons has cancer, and he is being treated at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital for acute lymphoblastic lymphoma. 50 years ago, he would have had almost no chance of survival. And thank God, due to decades of research from St. Jude and other hospitals, but primarily St. Jude, he has a very excellent chance of beating this cancer and living a long and normal life. When a tragedy of this nature strikes, it has devastating effects on any family, as you would expect. Very difficult. Emotionally, we were plucked up from our home and our family and our friends, had to move here very quickly under great duress. Didn't bring a stick of furniture, not one stick of furniture. We brought books for the boys' school and instruments to play and some clothes and a few other family items, family pictures, and we took off. And due to the kindness of the Christian community here in Memphis, we were able to furnish a home, and we've been living here, and we're going to be living here for the foreseeable future. But a traumatic event like this causes you to focus and to reprioritize and to say, all right, what matters? Now, for some of you, you have had a family member with cancer, the loss of a loved one, a spouse, a parent, a child. The loss of a parent is different than the loss of a spouse, and it's much different than a life and death struggle with a child. I have lost a child to death and a couple of years ago, and now fighting to save our son's life. So these life-changing, sometimes life-shattering events cause us, if we're wise at least, to reprioritize or to look and say, what matters? And so I want to speak to you from my heart, a dad to other parents or other grandparents, or maybe you're single, but you want to say, all right, what matters? So I'll ask you, what matters? In other words, if you knew that you were going to die in 14 days, what would matter? If you knew you had a year to live, what would matter? I think most thinking people would agree that our number one priority needs to be the salvation of our own soul. Paul wrote in the book of Philippians, he said, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. That's Philippians chapter 2, verse 16. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. In other words, it's a dreadful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And we want to know that we are in fellowship with Christ. Whatever denominational background that you are comfortable with the language of, all right? That you know the Lord, or that you are, quote, saved, or that you are, quote, redeemed, or that you are, quote, in the grace of God, or that you die in the friendship of Christ. Whatever it is, that it's front and center in your mind. Now, you know that I'm an activist. You know that I believe that we have to fight in the culture wars. And that hasn't changed. Now, I'm going to talk to you about that. But it has to do with priorities, and it also has to do with our salvation. In other words, where would you rather work out your salvation with fear and trembling? Here in America? In China? In Saudi Arabia? In Egypt? Hopefully a chill goes down our spines when we think about what it would be like to be a Christian in those lands, because the very act of the profession of our faith in those countries, which is a part of working out our salvation, professing Christ, the very act of professing our faith in those countries is a criminal act. And so I ask you, do you want to live in a country that is free, or do you want to live under the heel of oppression? I'm going to take a break. I will be discussing the things that are in the news, but I want to get a glass of water because my throat's a little raspy, and hopefully make a few more points to make you think as we are here in Memphis fighting for our son's life. This is the voice of resistance.
You have two choices. I mean, you can try to raise your children by design, or you will raise them by default. There are no perfect parents. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. If we have a plan, we've got a better chance of getting it right in the long run.
There is something deep within the heart of every human being that longs for parental acceptance and approval. When does a boy become a man?
Get a group of guys around and ask them that question.
I don't think there's a certain age. Some men stay boys their whole life.
I would say, 16, 18 years old.
Wow, that's a good question.
When they get bar mitzvah.
Well, I think when he has a child. So I just became at 56, 56 years old.
Without the power of the Holy Spirit changing us and giving us power over our sin, we can't hope to be the dads that our kids need us to be.
Why does a nice guy like me keep getting thrown in jail? I have been arrested almost 50 times and spent over a year of my life locked up in various prison facilities. And I wrote a book, many books. In fact, one of them is called Why Does a Nice Guy Like Me Keep Getting Thrown in Jail? It's a theological work, answering those who say that the church should not be involved in politics or that we should retreat. I encourage you to get it. In fact, get one and give it to your pastor. I needed that. I wasn't kidding. The Good Samaritan provides a good backdrop for looking at setting priorities. Many of us have sat in seminars over the years and gathered a lot of good data and had some jarring come to the altar, come to Jesus moments, focusing on priorities. And a lot of the teachings go something like this. Your first priority is your relationship with God. Next is your relationship with your immediate family. Next would be your job, providing for your family. Next would be your life with your church. Next might be hobbies or activism in the community, they start to disintegrate, when you apply who's teaching at any given moment. But there is a hierarchy. Some things are more important than others. They just are. And we should assess our lives through that grid. In other words, am I spending 6 or 8 or 10 hours a week focusing on sports? That might reflect something that's out of balance. Now, if your children are all in Little League and it's that season of the year when you're having to do it, that's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about the man or the woman who is obsessed with some entertainment, some bread and circus event. That might show something out of balance. So it's good that we have these teachings that make us look and see what matters. But I also want to suggest to you, this is for your food for thought, to jar your brain a little bit. I want to suggest to you that some of it is a false paradigm. Let me explain. If the Good Samaritan, or rather in the story of the Good Samaritan, when the priest and the Levite were walking by and saw the man dying in the ditch, maybe they said, I'm on my way to a special prayer service. And they said, I have to put God first. I don't have time. Or maybe the priest or the Levite, maybe they were married. And they said, this is the night that I promised my children I was going to play a game with them. Or this is our date night for my wife and I. And my marriage is high on the priority list. I think that it would be safe to say that in that situation, it's a false paradigm. It's a false weighing of what matters in the moment. There's a passage in the Proverbs that says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your heart. So what I think is a more safe way to look at life is to have as sort of a template. These are the things that matter. But if I am in church celebrating the resurrection of Christ, then that's my focal point at that moment. But if I'm romancing my spouse, that's the focal point at that moment. If I'm working, 6 days shall you labor and the 7th day rest. If I'm working, then I'm focused on work. Whatever my hand finds to do, I do it with all my heart. I'm present to the moment, present to the people, present to the activity. However, having said that, there come moments, times, some of them are very short windows, some of them are a little bit longer, when some overarching priority takes precedence and causes us to have to sacrifice. The easy illustration for us is coming here. We obviously didn't want to move out of state, leave our home, leave our family, leave our friends, our church people. We didn't want to do this. We wanted to be home. But saving our son's life takes priority. And with the Good Samaritan, certainly he was going somewhere. Certainly he had something to do. But when life and death is on the line for another human being, to love our neighbor as ourselves means that we have to sacrifice. That we have to set aside what we wanted to do. Maybe get dirty. Pour in the oil and the wine. Maybe sacrifice and take risks. Put this wounded man on our own beast. Take him to the inn. Take money out of our pocket. Give it to the innkeeper. So there are times when a life and death struggle requires that, at least for a window, for a season, for some amount of time, we restructure what it was that we thought we were going to do, and that becomes the priority at that moment. I want to use this principle as we discuss time management and the death of our culture. America is in a ditch, all right? As I've focused on the news for the last 3 days, I've become very alarmed. There's just so many bad things happening. There really are. And we're in a pickle, people. America is in a ditch. We're dying. And it's going to require the restructuring of some of our time in the framework of the priority of working out our salvation with fear and trembling. I'll be right back. This is the Voice of Resistance. Do you want to have knowledge, wisdom, discernment? If so, you have to read good books on theology, history, books that look at the lives of great men and women. So to help you to become a more effective Christian, a better witness for truth, somebody who can engage in productive conversation that exhorts and edifies those that you speak with, we're going to do something crazy. We're offering you these 7 books for a gift of any size. You just pay for the shipping and handling, and then give whatever gift that you can, and we will send them to you. But just to make it a little bit more crazy, I will send you a second copy of my 3 books, autographed. You can give them as a gift to your pastor or to a family member and help extend truth and justice in the world. This is while supplies last. I can testify that difficulties, or as the scripture calls them, the refiner's fire, have oftentimes been the path of most resistance, not least resistance, in the path of most resistance, and have also been what I needed to purify me, to get dross to come to the top. When they melt silver or gold, that's when the stuff comes up that's not supposed to be in it, the impurities, and then it's skimmed off. And so difficulties will present themselves in our lives so that we can look at what matters and so that some of the dross can come up. Now, some people, what happens is the dross comes up, but they never allow the Lord to skim it off. And then when the cooling happens, they've become calcified, and that dross, that nasty stuff, is all still right there. They don't become better, they become bitter. So going through difficulties is no guarantee that we are going to become better men and women. But nevertheless, God uses those stresses and those struggles to help us prioritize what matters and to assess our lives, hopefully looking forward to the day of judgment. All right? And what I want to challenge you to think about is this. In our time management, all right, there is a direct connection between our time management and working out our salvation with fear and trembling. Because the way we spend our time reflects what matters to us. So if I'm spending 12 hours a week watching the NFL and no hours a week trying, let's say, to save a baby's life from abortion, then that shows what my priorities are. And if I say that, well, I love my kids, but I spend 10 hours a week, watching sports scores, and when my son or my daughter comes in the room and says, Daddy, will you play catch with me? Or Daddy, will you do this with me? I say, go away, I'm busy. And I'm like the statistic that says I spend 2 minutes a day talking to my child, but God knows how many hours on my godless device. Then again, something is out of whack. And this also goes to what matters nationally. So I started off this segment saying, this show talking about that there is a hierarchy, okay? There are things that matter. And there are things that matter on a national level and on a local level, and how we spend our time dealing with those things. And the ability to have an experience with Christ and to raise our children in the faith is directly impacted by what's going on around us in the public square, in the body politic. In other words, the fact that our government legalized pornography, all right, a generation ago, and now it's flooding in on computers and on our devices. The fact that the government legalized the murder of babies. the fact that the courts have opened the door, the floodgate for so-called same-sex, same-gender marriage. All of these things and many others are having an impact on the souls of our children and may affect, God please forbid, God please save us, may affect where some of them spend eternity. I would venture to guess that there's a lot more people going to hell per capita from, say, Saudi Arabia, where the gospel is not allowed to be preached and people are living and dying without Christ, or in China, than in a free country where the gospel can be preached and people can embrace Christ. So us fighting for justice and liberty in the public square can have a direct impact on the gospel and who gets to hear it, who gets to live it, and who gets to enjoy the good news and spend eternity in heaven. So these things that we might think, oh, politics is of the world, hey, don't kid yourself. Don't kid yourself. Christ is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, and you better believe that political issues and what happens in government and what happens in our culture matters to him, because it will impact where we and our children spend eternity. This is the Voice of Resistance. I'll be right back. Do you want to get America out of the hands of wicked and unjust men and women who are destroying the republic before our eyes, and put leadership back into the hands of righteous men and women so that we don't die as a nation? Well, you're talking about social revolution, and there are rules in social revolution. We can look at the victorious social revolutions of the past, such as the end of slavery, the end of child labor, women's voting rights, the end of segregation, and so much more, and learn from their victories. Look at their actions, their images, their rhetoric, their sacrifices, and their final fruit. We will send you this series that originally cost $129, 7 books for students, 1 teacher's guide, if you'll give a gift of any size and just pay for shipping and handling. Take advantage of it today. Become knowledgeable, become a voice, become a force for truth and for justice. Think about what is in the news today, all right? The drone strikes. Islam, true historic Islam, is a threat to the human race, to Christianity, to liberty. The representatives from various states meeting to figure out how they can get control of lands back to state hands, to local hands, out of federal hands. Critical issue. The overarching issues at play are states' rights, the Second Amendment, right? There was an armed standoff in Nevada recently. First time in a long time, first time in my life that I know of that federal agents backed down, all right? Child killing. My news alerts daily come in with some news about some state trying to pass some law that would limit the number of babies that can be killed. And then some federal judge striking this down, striking that down. The attack on marriage. These things are here. The unthinkable deficit spending that we're in, enslaving our children to debt. These things matter. So my challenge to you is this. Use your time, manage your time, get rid of the bread and circuses, and become knowledgeable on 1 or 2 or 3 of these things. Become knowledgeable so that you can be a voice on them. You can talk to your friends, to your family, and then maybe even ratchet it up a step further and become a force for these things. The saying is, all that is necessary for evil to triumph is that good men do nothing. That's actually true. Well, let's be the good men who do something. Become knowledgeable. Become a voice. Become a force Become a part of the resistance.